Hey everybody, this is Khara Brindle. This is another video in the Counselor Development Series, and I'm excited to have two amazing colleagues join me today for a conversation where I feel out of my element. So very grateful they're both here. We're going to be talking about W-2 versus 1099 contractors when it comes to joining a group practice. So before we even jump into that, I want them to introduce themselves so you get a chance to know why they have this expertise, but also to learn more about them. Who would like to go first?
I can go first. My name is Carla. I have a group practice in Westminster called Ignite Counseling Colorado, and we are a small and mighty team, in a growing phase right now. I have W-2 employees, and we specialize in treatment of PTSD and trauma and OCD, along with substance use. Prior to getting into the field of mental health counseling, I had a first career in business, in particular human resources. And so I had about 12 years in the corporate human resources field, leading teams, supporting business units, and I have a background with an MBA emphasis in HR.
Hi, I'm Sarah Spurlock, and I'm the owner of Denver Counseling Solutions. We are a group counseling practice with 4 different locations, currently and about 15 people on staff. Most of our locations are kind of in the suburbs of Denver, and we're working with a lot of families. Like, a lot of the work we do is families, couples, teens, children, obviously individuals with anxiety, depression, some of that basic stuff, but a lot of what we do is kind of family related, and we have people who do a little bit of everything. Like, we have some people who specialize in addiction, some who specialize in trauma, and some who specialize in play therapy. So we kind of pride ourselves on being able to have lots of options for people to choose from, as well as our fees being really affordable. And we have lots of options to meet people's budgets as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Bethany?
Good morning. I am Bethany Barta, and I am the owner of Insight Counseling and Wellness Center. And we have 2 office locations in the downtown Denver area. And let's see, we have 15 people on staff and currently have 4 interns. And I mostly specialize in trauma-informed care, trauma-specific treatment, and women's empowerment. We've recently added in a big wellness component, and we're offering meditation groups, a book club, women's empowerment and support groups. And soon we'll be offering yoga therapy, which is really exciting. We're mostly insurance-based. Most of our groups are supported by billing insurance, and we offer affordable counseling through our intern program. We have a pretty robust intern training program, and we're looking at expanding even more in the coming months.
I feel like everyone's trying to do that, right? So for the people who are watching this video after the fact, we're here to talk about the W-2 employee versus the 1099 contractor. These 3 wonderful leaders have more experience than I do having that conversation, especially as they're in the hiring process, because all of you are growing your practices. So to kick this off, I want to start with the W-2 employee, just because I feel like that's a natural place to start. I feel like a lot of people are considering that option, and there's a lot of pros and cons to that. So let's start with the pros. What do you think would be an incentive or a reason to offer a W-2 employee option in your practice?
Well, I've had the experience of having both. I started in 2008 hiring independent contractors, and had independent contractors for, until about 2 years ago. And so we switched almost everyone to a W-2 model. And what I've noticed is, as I've been able to step into leadership with people having real full-time W-2 employees, I've been able to provide more training, supervision, and more support services. So I'd say that is probably the first thing that comes to mind for me, among others.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. What else comes to mind for the rest of you?
I would say it somewhat streamlines the process. Like, instead of everything being segmented when you're 1099, I think that kind of as Bethany was saying, you can get benefits. Your taxes are already taken care of and included in the process with pay. You can get supervision and trainings and things of that nature. So it kind of makes it just a lot more cohesive, I would say, and more streamlined in a lot of different aspects.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Carla?
I would build on both what Bethany and Sarah have said around streamlining and ability to offer access to development and training. And I would say also being able to have a really strong brand and sense of team and camaraderie. I think in particular, when we have had past discussions around, as we're growing teams and what makes a W-2 more appealing to somebody who's a prospective, I don't ever want to forget the conversation around team and culture and being a part of something meaningful and, being able to see some longevity in a practice. Because I think, there are pretty strict rules around the technicality of W-2 versus 1099. And I think a lot of folks don't really have a good understanding of that. So having an employment attorney advisor is super helpful on that end. So it's not just changing the label, but it's all of the things that, we just discussed, and being able to, I think as an employer, being able to do more in the way of investing in perks and benefits and really building a sense of team cohesiveness.
And that's a great gentle reminder that for anyone who's watching this video later, that we are not employment lawyers. We're all mental health leaders, group practice owners, and there are answers to be sought by someone who's in that designation to really understand the differences between W-2 and 1099. Because you're right, they are absolutely different from the tax level, from how we conduct ourselves, from how we format our group practices, all of that. So thank you, Carla, for reminding me of that. Are there any cons? Now, I know that there's a bias here because a lot of our colleagues, including the three of you, it sounds like, do mostly employee work now or offer that position. So I want to name that for our viewers. But would there be any cons that you've heard from potential applicants or just barriers that make this a little bit more challenging?
I would say maybe two things. Obviously, you get and I, like Bethany, started out with contractors and shifted to an employee model. And I would say, so having experienced both, some of the cons might be like if you are a 1099, you get more take-home pay up front, which benefits a lot of people. So taxes are not automatically taken out, and a lot of people see that initial take-home pay as a perk, whereas an employee, that wouldn't be an option. And then autonomy of a 1099, like I think like the perks of a 1099 are what the cons of an employee maybe. So if you're a 1099, there is a little bit of more autonomy, independence, and things of that nature, I think, are probably the two biggest differences.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that's really come to light for me and become really clear, and it's happened through conversations with my team and the folks that work here, is that you're going to pay for it somewhere. And so as an IC, you might get a lot of money up front. But I guess, well, I'm kind of, this is going to answer lots of questions, not just cons. So I'm just going to jump in with that. But if you're an IC, you're going to pay for it by doing your own work, managing your own taxes, managing your own EHR, managing all the bills and overhead, and doing all of that. And as what that means is you get a lot of expenses in your own business And so a con of being a W-2 is you don't get a lot of expenses because you're essentially paying for someone to do all of that for you. So I just wanted to add that as a kind of a positive for W-2s, for folks who maybe don't have a lot of organizational skills or don't like to handle the details because they really have a strong therapist brain, which is really necessary to do good therapy. You as a W-2 get to show up and do what you love doing, and you don't have to worry about the details of it all. And in some senses, you're paying for that financially perhaps, but you're getting a lot of those other perks. And the con of that is you maybe lose a little autonomy because an employer might require a certain number of clients seen per week. But I will say, as a private practitioner, way back when it was just me, I also had to see a certain number of clients a week to pay my bills. And so it's all really similar. It's just trade-offs in all the different aspects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bethany, what you made me think of with that part is also a build on to when I'm having conversations with us colleagues around the employer side or the owner side of pros and cons of making that shift. So my initial plus one when I went from a solo practice to another was a contractor, and then another contractor, and now we're in a W-2 model. And so I'm thinking, okay, we've all had that. It looks like that trajectory. And so when I get questions from colleagues around why did you make that decision and what were your pros and cons with it, I also talk to them about, when you do make that switch to W-2, it is a long game decision as far as your finances, because it will play mind tricks where you go, oh my gosh, I've got all of these additional expenses. So there's this piece that's forward facing for prospective employees that we're talking about. And then also for, I think, us as colleagues, as business owners, being prepared for some sticker shock and thinking about, is something wrong with the way I'm doing this conversion because I'm not pulling profit right now, and what's a reasonable expectation with that? I have a business background and it still shook me in my boots. I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm making the right decision here. And now I know I have, but I think that is something that I have conversations with colleagues about quite often. Mm-hmm. And then talking about pros and cons from a prospective employee side. Like what you said, Bethany, there are two brains that we have to have if we're in private practice. One is that business side, and one is I'm a really great therapist and I've got clinical skill set. And they're kind of disparate, or very disparate at times. And so I love what you said about having that conversation with a candidate or an employee candidate of here are the advantages. We can't be great at everything. And if you're like, I have nothing in me for marketing and thinking about liability insurance and paying my quarterly taxes, then, that's a distinct advantage of being part of a team as a W-2. Yeah.
Right. And I love that we're having this conversation, because I think for some people, this doesn't even occur to them because they just hear these labels. And as all three of you have mentioned, they hear kind of the pros of like, oh, autonomy, I set my own schedule. I see as many clients as I want as a contractor, kind of big level. And then employee side, team camaraderie, making sure that they're feeling connected. Maybe they have office space because contractors aren't supposed to have office space. Like there's just so many distinctions there that folks are trying to wrap their head around. And so it makes sense that here in Colorado, a lot of our colleagues are moving to an employee model, because what I've heard from the leaders like yourselves is they want retention. They want a team that feels connected. They want to feel like they're building something great, not just hey, revolving door, contractor in, contractor out, which is, I think, is one of the cons if we were allowed to move to that direction for a moment, because some of you did start with contractors and made this decision to move to this other model. So talk to me more about what comes up for folks that are looking at the contractor role, because I know that still is enticing to some who have independence desire.
One thing I would say, this is kind of specific, but or so maybe like a side note, but like right now, candidates, so finding people who still need supervision, or I should say employing people who still need supervision, doing a W-2 model works very well for that. It gets very wonky if you're, and I feel like if you're open as a candidate to a W-2 model, it makes you more employable because it streamlines that process with supervision and training. Whereas if a candidate is a contractor, it makes like those pieces a lot more disjointed, and you get into just some confusion with, there are, I believe, employment law, there are 12 things that separate 1099 from W-2. Like there are 12 criteria that make you a contractor versus an employee. Now don't ask me to name all those because I couldn't name all those, but it can be difficult, honestly, to like make sure you're not make sure, but like assure that you are following all those guidelines. Like it can be, there's a lot of gray area, and then I think people get confused as to, okay, what's allowed, what's not allowed, because again, we're therapists, we're not employment lawyers, you know. We don't know tax law, you know, expertly. So it's like when someone's a W-2, it makes it almost a little easier to go, we know what falls in this purview. And I would second what Carla and Bethany have said, like certainly building that culture piece, and people like wanting to be a part of a team. Like it's not as disjointed or segmented. It brings people together. And I would just, you know, echo that as well from what they've said.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the contractor piece, the piece that we're hearing the most of why people are still interested in that, is the autonomy that you've all named, but also the assumption that there's a bigger takeaway pay because they're not factoring in those taxes that come out later, or they're not factoring in all the expenses, which I'm hearing could be everything from their own equipment to their own office to transportation to trainings and getting independent supervision. I'm hearing that from all three of you. Yes.
Yeah, and we consulted with another colleague, and she kind of made a list for us of, because she couldn't make the video here, and so one of the things she had put on there, and Carrie, you can fill in the blanks as I'm referencing this, but like one of the things she had listed as one of her points would be is that you actually end up paying more, which she kind of calculated it out. I didn't know all the exact numbers, so I was impressed. You actually end up paying more in taxes as a 1099. Right. And it's almost twice as much, like the calculation was. And that's because the money from an employer going into Social Security and things of that nature that are already taken out, like the percentage is less. Whereas if you're paying that on your own through your own LLC as a contractor, it's almost twice as much that you end up paying in taxes. Right. And so I kind of wish she was here because she actually like calculated that out. And
yeah, it was like 15
like I knew it in my mind, but I was like, that's exactly correct, you know?
Yeah, really yeah. And I think two other things that stood out to me on her list, just to reference here in this video, were PTO and EAP benefits. You know, these are things that I think as we're tracking kind of the burnout in the field and the fact that there's a mental health crisis going on when we're recording this video, that I feel like those actually are going to become more important to folks who are joining a group practice if that's where they want to head and going that direction. So can anyone talk to me about those two things, PTO and EAP therapy benefits?
I just want to reference really quick what Carla said earlier, because I think this is where she'll chime in as well. People, that group practice owners get nervous about W-2s costing more. And I have had that conversation with lots of people, just like she said. And I think that's one of the areas, PTO is one of the areas where group practice owners are like, oh, that's going to cost me a lot more. And I have found, and Carla can probably speak even more to this, possibly, but like I have found that actually hasn't really affected things in the long run. Like when you run the numbers, like offering the types of benefits that we're offering, and we're not some large corporation. I mean, so the types of overhead for our benefits isn't totally extreme, but like I have found those numbers, one, it's a perk, like Khara's saying, to give PTO. Obviously people enjoy that, but as an owner, when I run those numbers, I'm like, at the end of the day, it's totally worth it, and maybe even saves me some money.
Yeah. I would add that we as business owners, when making this decision, it can be really helpful to also look process flow wise at what it costs to onboard a person into our practice. Because even though that is not something that would be on the list of life insurance and PTO and EAP benefits, there is a dollar amount to that, both, time that we may be spending in that training, our teammates helping that person on board, the lag time after training to feeling like that employee is fully trained, or that person, so may not be an employee, but also a contractor. So when I think of Ignite's onboarding process, and this was also something that helped me make that jump to W-2 model, is we have some specialties that we offer. And my colleague Lori Johnson and I specialize in treatment of OCD using ERP. There is no certification for that. We're building the plane together as it's flying. And that takes time, effort, on our part, regardless of employment type or independent contractor type. When somebody is coming in to Ignite, they're still going to be taking that series of training, because that's something that we specialize in the community, and that's worth something. So I really encourage business owners, practice owners, as they're thinking about that too, of, do I know how much it costs to onboard a newbie? Do I have a general idea of that? Because that also goes into total compensation. I think that, Sarah, what you were talking about is the criteria. So Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA.gov, that is the place to go reference. And it sometimes modifies over time. So again, like either feeling comfortable navigating the government website with that, or finding a really sharp employment attorney that knows how to read through that is so helpful. And being able to articulate that good enough for those that we're recruiting, I think is helpful. But that has been something I've been working on myself in the past handful of weeks, of how can I articulate to a prospective person joining the team of what those other, I don't want to call them passive benefits, maybe not like bottom line on a P&L spreadsheet, but real benefits and costs, whether that be specialized training, finding out what it costs per person for, if you have a suite of offices and you have one person occupying that one office from 9 to 2 p.m., 5 days a week, what is that per hour rental cost? So challenging that part too, I think can be really helpful with the sticker shock of doing the employee model as well.
Okay. So for our viewers who are most likely going to be young therapists, people who are just coming into the field from master's programs or doctoral programs, I'd love to wrap up our video by having each of you share one final tip or suggestion, piece of advice for them as they try to navigate the employee versus contractor model. So I know we've given them lots of things to consider today. If there's 12 criteria, here's a website, here are some pros and cons, but one final thing that is coming to mind for each of you, if that's okay.
I would say something that's been up in my mind lately is that we have in our field this idea of private practice being the end all be all of success. And I'd like to really shift that and really think about, encourage people to think about what feels like success for them and what do they want to see themselves doing day in and day out. Because what we think is like entrepreneurship and owning your own business and private practice can be lonely and overwhelming, and that there's other ways to evaluate our success in this field.
I would say it kind of comes back to that culture piece, like being an employee at a group practice, like you're part of something, like you're getting on board with a vision that's something larger than yourself, being able to work as a team, and at a small group practice, you're able to really contribute to that, like be a part of creating that team, creating that vision as well, and working together. So I think that's, for me, that's a lot of what it boils down to, is being able to support one another and be on a team. And then also tapping into that idea of like, if your skill set isn't to do all these things on your own, right? Like this is an opportunity where these things such as marketing and having all the overhead taken care of and office space and all that, like if that's not your gig, like it's an opportunity where someone else is working with you and taking care of all of that. So those would probably be the two biggest things that I would that stand out to me.
Can I just say ditto? Those are great.
Done.
The thing that came to mind when you asked that final question was, I had a conversation with a recent hire, and she was like, "What? Why don't we learn this in school? Can you come talk to the class?" And so I think the takeaway I would say is, for those of you that are new into the field, maybe you're still in school, and if you're in school, talk to your program about getting a speaker in to talk about these things. I wish I had that in grad school. And then if you've already launched out of school and you're looking for a landing place, I suggest you reach out to those that you see in the community that have kind of an inspiring story. So they may have a practice where you go, "Oh, that looks like a really neat team," and learn more from that perspective of, group practice owner, why did you decide to do a W-2 model, and what should I be thinking about? So building community, even as you're making your decision to land with the team, I think would be really great.
I love that, because I think, to all of your points, this is still so gray, right? Like, I mean, we've touched on the tip of the iceberg in this video. Here are some things to consider. Obviously, talking to the community, interviewing people, where are they happy, where do they feel like the culture of the group practice is good if they decide to go that direction. And I would say make a list of, like, here, like we talked about today, make some pros and cons of like what is most important for somebody who's looking to apply or to interview for a group practice, so they can come in feeling confident of, this is a model that would fit for me, or this would be a model that's not a good fit. So for any of our viewers who are type A and love making lists like I do, make a list, have the visual. I think that could be really helpful. So I just want to thank all three of you. I really appreciate your expertise in this area and taking the time to talk about this with me. And I really do feel like it'll make a difference in our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Viewers, I'll put everybody's contact information in the bottom of the video, so you can actually contact these lovely mental health leaders if you have questions for them. And we will see you in another video. See you next time.